The snow was falling hard that morning when a man in a yellow coat pushed his elderly father's wheelchair down the empty street. The old veteran shivered, begging his son not to take him there, not to the shelter for forgotten soldiers. But the son kept walking, his face cold, his heart heavier than the storm. "It's for your own good, Dad," he muttered, though even he didn't believe it. Then, out of the blinding white, a Navy SEAL and his German Shepherd appeared, moving fast, sensing something wasn't right. That simple encounter on a frozen street would change all their lives forever. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more. By mid-afternoon, the storm had quieted into a whisper. The world outside was a vast sheet of white, but the snow no longer fell in anger. It drifted like exhausted feathers. The diner's windows were fogged from the heat of bodies and coffee, and when Logan finally stood to leave, the others followed. Evan paid for the drinks in silence, avoiding his father's gaze. He still believed he was doing the right thing, but that belief was starting to fray like a thread pulled too tight. Ranger waited by the door, tail low, glancing between them as if he understood too much of human tension. The road to St. Bernard's Veterans Shelter wound past the harbor and up a small hill overlooking the frozen sea. Logan led the way on foot, insisting they move slowly, since the plows hadn't cleared the narrow streets yet. The shelter stood at the edge of town, an old red brick building from the 1940s, with a rusted sign and a single flag whipping in the cold wind. The letters on the wall had faded, but the words still carried weight. For those who served. Inside, the warmth was uneven. The hall smelled faintly of disinfectant and old wool coats. Men sat hunched on benches near a heater, each lost in his own storm. Some stared blankly at the wall. Others whispered to no one. Logan had seen looks like that before. Men who survived war, but lost themselves afterward. Ranger walked close to his side, head bowed, tail brushing against the tile. A woman appeared from an office at the end of the hall, wiping her hands on a towel. "You must be the Dawsons," she said, her voice kind but firm. Sarah Hill was in her early 30s, tall and slender, with a calm grace that came from years of balancing empathy and exhaustion. Her skin was pale from long indoor hours. A few freckles dotted her cheeks. She wore a thick gray sweater and jeans tucked into boots, her chestnut hair pulled into a loose ponytail. Behind the tiredness in her green eyes lived a quiet fire, the kind of strength that could comfort the broken without pitying them. "That's right," Evan said stiffly. "I called this morning. This is my father, Henry Dawson." Sarah's gaze softened as she looked at the old man in the chair. "Welcome, Mr. Dawson. You're safe here." Henry didn't respond right away. He studied the faces around the lobby, the bent backs, the trembling hands, the faraway gazes. He saw reflections of himself in them, and it terrified him. "Safe," he muttered. "This isn't safety. It's waiting." Sarah crouched slightly, meeting his eyes. "It's also warmth, meals, medicine, and company. For most men here, it's the first time in years anyone's called them by name." Henry's jaw tightened. "I'm not ready to die surrounded by ghosts." The words struck something in Evan, but pride held his tongue. "He doesn't mean that," Evan said quickly. "He's just tired. He'll adjust." Sarah rose, glancing between father and son, sensing the fragile distance that neither could cross. She turned to Logan, who stood near the doorway with Ranger. "You brought them here?" "Just helping out," Logan said quietly. His voice carried the steady rhythm of discipline, but also something softer, respect. "Thank you," she said. "We're short-staffed as always. Winter brings more in from the streets." She sighed. "Some don't have family left. Some do, but family stops calling." Logan's expression didn't change, but inside, her words echoed painfully. He had no family left either. Ranger was the only heartbeat that kept him from talking to his own walls. "If you need extra hands," he said after a pause, "I can help." Sarah nodded appreciatively. "We can always use help. I'm running intake and supplies today, and feeding the dogs in the yard." That caught Ranger's attention. His ears perked. He let out a soft chuff as if volunteering. Sarah smiled for the first time. "Friendly one, isn't he?" "He's trained," Logan replied. "Knows when to fight and when to wait." "I could use a few like him," she said, half joking, and disappeared into the hallway to fetch papers. Evan wheeled his father toward the front desk. The form was long: name, age, medical conditions, service branch, next of kin. Every word felt like another small betrayal. Henry stared at the line marked permanent or temporary stay. He whispered, "Which box are you checking, son?" Evan hesitated. "Just temporary, Dad, until we sort things out." "Temporary," Henry repeated, his tone hollow. "That's what they said about the war, too." Ranger gave a low, uneasy sound, resting his chin on Logan's boot. Logan reached down absently, rubbing the dog's neck, eyes flicking between the two men. Evan's shoulders were tight with shame, his face turned away. Logan had seen soldiers look that way before. Men who followed orders that didn't sit right with their conscience. Sarah returned with blankets and a clipboard. "We can place him in Ward C, next to the window. It's quieter there." Henry shook his head. "No window can make this place quiet." But he allowed them to push him down the corridor, where paint peeled from the walls and the scent of bleach clung stubbornly to everything. They passed a row of cots where men slept or stared at faded photographs. A nurse, a short man with kind eyes named Ben Morales, nodded in greeting. His uniform was rumpled, his hair graying at the temples. He'd been working double shifts all week, but he still managed a tired smile. "Welcome, sir," he said to Henry. "We'll get you settled." Ben's tone was gentle, but Henry's jaw clenched. He despised being treated like a patient. When the nurse tried to adjust his blanket, Henry brushed his hand away. "I can manage." Ben just nodded. "Of course, sir." He moved quietly to the next bed, the kind of man who knew pride when he saw it and respected it. Evan lingered near the doorway, while Logan stood behind him, unsure whether to stay or go. The air felt heavier than the storm outside. Sarah spoke softly, trying to fill the silence. "You did the right thing, bringing him here." Evan gave a short, humorless laugh. "That's what everyone keeps telling me." Logan finally spoke. "Sometimes the right thing feels wrong. Doesn't mean it isn't." Evan turned sharply. "And sometimes it means you just don't have the guts to face the wrong one." The words hung between them. Ranger lifted his head, sensing the tension. Before anyone could reply, Henry coughed. Once, then twice, deep and violent. The sound tore through the hall. Sarah rushed forward, steadying him as his chest heaved. Logan instinctively stepped in, gripping Henry's shoulder to keep him upright. Evan froze, panic flashing across his face. "I'm fine," Henry wheezed, but the color drained from his skin. "Just fine." "Easy," Logan said, his voice calm but firm. "Breathe slowly." Henry's hand shot out and grabbed his son's wrist. His grip, though frail, carried all the strength left in him. His voice trembled. "Evan, when you walk away, don't forget, your father once pulled men from fire so you could live free." Evan's throat tightened. The words hit like a strike to the chest. He wanted to answer, to tell his father he wasn't abandoning him, but no sound came. Sarah gently pulled a chair closer. "He needs rest," she said softly. "You can stay a while if you want." But Evan couldn't move. He stood there as if nailed to the floor, watching his father's breathing steady under the thin blanket. Logan laid a hand on his shoulder, just a brief, human gesture, and Evan nodded wordlessly, eyes burning. Outside, the storm had ended, but the world remained cold and white. Inside the shelter, silence pressed against the walls, broken only by the steady rhythm of an old soldier's breath and the soft click of rangers' claws on the tile, like a heartbeat reminding them all that not every battle was fought with guns. The snow outside had thinned into a quiet drizzle of frost, falling gently on the small, dim town of Portsville. Streetlights glowed behind veils of fog, painting the icy road in shades of amber and gray. Evan Dawson's house stood near the harbor, a cramped one-story with peeling blue paint and a roof that moaned under the weight of winter. Inside, silence hung heavy. The space smelled faintly of oil, rust, and old coffee, remnants of his trade as a mechanic, and the life of a man who no longer cared about making a home, only surviving another day. He stood near the window for a long while, watching the snow melt against the glass, before turning his attention to a dusty wooden trunk beneath the kitchen table. It was his father's. The trunk had followed them through every move since Evan's mother died. Henry never opened it, never spoke of its contents. But now, after the words his father had spoken in the shelter, "Don't forget that I once saved men so you could live free," Evan felt an ache twisting in his chest. He knelt down, brushed off the dust, and lifted the lid. Inside lay pieces of a man Evan had never met. Old photos, yellowed letters, a faded green beret, folded neatly, and medals glinting faintly beneath the dim light. At the center was a silver star, its ribbon frayed with age. Evan picked it up, turning it over in his palm. On the back, engraved in worn letters, was a name and date: Henry Dawson, Da Nang, 1969. Beneath it, a note in his father's cramped handwriting, for saving 6 men from the flames. Evan sank to the floor. For a long moment, he couldn't move. He remembered the way his father's hands shook when lifting a spoon, how his voice cracked when he mentioned Vietnam. He had never asked what those tremors meant, never asked why the man who once commanded soldiers now struggled to command his own breath. Shame hit him like a wave. He had thought of his father as a burden, a man wasting away in bitterness. But the truth was simpler and crueler. His father had carried his own battlefield inside him for half a century. He held the medal to his chest, eyes burning. "I'm sorry, Dad," he whispered into the quiet. "I never asked who you really were." The clock ticked slowly. Outside, wind brushed past the windows like a sigh. Evan closed the trunk, took the medal, and placed it on the table beside a half-empty mug. For the first time in years, he felt something that wasn't resentment. It was grief, heavy and cleansing. At that same hour, the world inside St. Bernard's shelter moved at a slower rhythm. The hall smelled faintly of soup and detergent, the soft hum of a radio echoing from the nurse's station. Logan Hale stood near the back room, sleeves rolled up, helping Sarah Hill distribute breakfast trays to the veterans. Sarah moved with quiet efficiency, her tall frame gliding through narrow aisles with a grace that came from practice. The faint scent of her lavender soap cut through the sterile air. Logan noticed the way her shoulders stiffened every time one of the patients coughed. She carried other people's pain as if it were her own. "Rough morning?" he asked softly, handing her another tray. Sarah smiled faintly, though her eyes betrayed fatigue. "They all are. Half of these men haven't seen their families in years. Some forgot what day it is. Sometimes they ask me if the war's still going." She paused, glancing at Henry's room. "But at least one of them has a visitor now. Your dog." Logan turned to see Ranger, his loyal German shepherd, lying beside Henry's wheelchair. The dog rested his head on the old man's knee, eyes half closed, tail giving an occasional wag whenever Henry spoke. Henry chuckled, voice gravelly but light. "He listens better than most men I served with." He stroked the dog's fur gently, his wrinkled hand trembling, but steady enough to show affection. "Ranger's got good instincts," Logan said as he approached. "Knows when someone needs him." "Then he's smarter than people," Henry replied, smiling faintly. "He reminds me of a shepherd we had in Da Nang, a stray that used to follow our unit everywhere. Brave as hell." Logan pulled up a chair. "You served in Da Nang?" Henry nodded slowly, eyes clouding with memory. 69. The worst year, some called it. We were stationed near the Quang Nam River. Everything burned that summer. Trees, huts, men. I carried a radio that day, called in fire support when our convoy was ambushed. 6 of my men trapped in a bunker with ammo cooking off. I dragged them out one by one. Still remember the sound of their boots scraping the dirt. He paused, eyes distant. One of them was a Navy man. Hale, I think. Michael Hale. Strong fellow, always carried extra water for the wounded. Logan froze. His breath hitched for a second. "Michael Hale?" "That's right," Henry said, unaware of the tremor in the younger man's voice. "Said he had a baby boy waiting at home. Talked about fishing with him someday. But the next morning, a mortar hit near our line. They said he was missing in action. I never found his body." For a long time, Logan couldn't speak. The hum of the fluorescent light above them filled the silence. Ranger lifted his head, sensing his handler's sudden tension. "My father's name was Michael Hale," Logan said quietly. "He served in the Navy. He disappeared in 69. Henry's hand stopped mid-motion. He looked up, his face etched with disbelief. "You're his boy?" "I never knew what happened to him," Logan replied, voice low, raw. "My mother died when I was 12. All I had were stories, some real, some not. They told me he was lost in Vietnam." Henry's lips parted, but no sound came. Then slowly, he reached out and grasped Logan's wrist with a trembling hand. "He saved my life once. We were pinned down in a rice paddy. He dragged me to cover, even though shrapnel tore his leg. Said, 'Don't forget me, old man.'" The old soldier's eyes filled with tears. And I never did. Sarah, who had stood quietly nearby, pressed a hand to her chest. Even after years in the shelter, scenes like this could still break her heart. She spoke softly, her voice almost reverent. "Maybe he's the reason you met." Logan looked down at Ranger, who nuzzled Henry's hand again. "Maybe he is." The three sat in silence, the weight of history pressing gently between them. Outside, snow began to fall again, light and slow, as if the sky was mourning something long forgotten. Hours later, when the shelter dimmed for the night, Logan stood at the door of Henry's room. The old man slept soundly. Ranger curled at his feet like a living sentinel. Sarah joined Logan in the hallway, holding a stack of files. He hasn't slept that peacefully in weeks, she whispered. He's earned it, Logan said. He's been fighting that war long enough. Sarah smiled, tired but sincere. You too, maybe. He didn't answer. His thoughts were elsewhere, on a man named Michael Hale, on the war that had taken one father and returned another. The following morning broke under a pale sun that did little to melt the frost. The snow in Portsville glittered like powdered glass, and the sea beyond the harbor groaned beneath thin sheets of ice. At St. Bernard's Shelter, the air carried the soft hum of heaters and the faint smell of oatmeal. The veterans stirred awake one by one, their breaths forming ghosts in the chilly dormitory. Henry Dawson sat near the window, wrapped in a wool blanket, a mug of coffee trembling in his thin hands. His eyes, clouded with age, yet brightened by memory, gazed out toward the pale horizon. Beside him lay Ranger, Logan Hale's German Shepherd, the loyal dog resting his head on the armrest of Henry's wheelchair, his black and tan fur glinting in the morning light. Logan entered quietly, wearing a heavy navy blue jacket, his breath visible in the cold air. He looked rested, but thoughtful, the creases near his eyes deepened by a night of restless reflection. "Morning, sir," he greeted. "Sleep any better?" Henry smiled faintly. "Better than most nights, these past 20 years. He gestured to the empty chair near him. "Sit. There's something I didn't finish telling you yesterday." Logan sat down, elbows on his knees. Sarah Hill, the tall, auburn-haired social worker, peeked through the doorway with her clipboard before retreating, leaving them in peace. Her green eyes lingered for a second on Logan, perhaps noticing the way his shoulders carried invisible weight. Then she vanished down the hall, her footsteps soft against the linoleum floor. Henry set the mug aside, exhaling slowly. "You wanted to know about your father," he began. "Michael Hale." Logan's pulse quickened. "The last time I saw him was in Vietnam, 1969. We were in Da Nang, part of an infantry detachment caught between two ridges. The jungle burned for days back then. Everything was smoke and noise. Your father, he was Navy, assigned for communication logistics. The man had this stubborn courage, the kind that looked reckless, but wasn't. He didn't talk much, but when he did, it mattered." Henry's voice trembled slightly. "He reminded me of you." He paused, his gaze drifting toward Ranger. The dog stirred, ears twitching as if he too were listening. "One night," Henry continued, "our position was shelled. Mortars, heavy artillery, everything. The bunker collapsed, trapping 6 of my men. Your father came from another unit and joined me, helping dig them out. We used our helmets and bare hands. Then a fire started from a ruptured fuel drum. He pushed me clear when the second shell hit. The blast threw him across the dirt. I tried to reach him, but debris fell between us. We both thought the other didn't make it." Henry's eyes dimmed with the weight of that memory. "After the battle, they told me he'd gone missing. For years, I carried guilt that I couldn't pull him out." He leaned forward, retrieving a small envelope from his coat pocket. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded, but legible. "A few months later, I got this letter in the mail. No return address, just 2 words signed at the bottom. Thank you. M.H." Logan's heart hammered in his chest. Henry unfolded the letter carefully, hands shaking. The words were brief, written in neat, slanted cursive. "You saved more than men that night, Henry. You saved their sons, their families. If I don't make it home, tell them I was proud to serve beside you." The signature at the bottom, M.H., curved with the same loops and pressure that Logan remembered from his father's old notes. Small letters his mother had kept in a shoebox all those years ago. Logan's throat tightened as he traced the ink with his finger. "This is his handwriting," he whispered. Henry nodded, emotion flickering across his face like light on rippling water. "Then your father made it out, at least long enough to send this." Silence filled the room. The heater hummed, and Ranger let out a slow, contented sigh, as if acknowledging something sacred. "Maybe," Logan said quietly. "We weren't meant to meet until now." Henry smiled, a fragile, knowing smile. "Or maybe God kept us alive just long enough to close a story he started 50 years ago." Outside, the wind had softened, and the snow shimmered beneath sunlight. That same afternoon, Evan Dawson drove back toward the shelter. The road wound through frozen pines, sunlight bouncing off the hood of his old pickup truck. His eyes were red from lack of sleep. The silver star medal hung from his neck by a chain, resting over his heart like an anchor. He had spent the night turning it over in his hands, replaying his father's words, the guilt still gnawing at him. When he arrived, he parked near the gate and stepped out into the crisp air. The sound of laughter drew his attention. Through the courtyard fence, he saw his father sitting outside, wrapped in his military coat, while Logan stood behind the wheelchair, pushing him slowly down a cleared path. Ranger trotted beside them, his breath steaming in the cold. Henry was talking animatedly, his hands moving as he spoke. Evan stayed where he was, hidden from view, unable to interrupt the fragile peace of the scene. His father's voice carried faintly on the wind. "That's when the flare went up. I thought we were done for. Then your dad came charging through the smoke like a madman, shouting orders. The bravest man I ever saw." Logan laughed softly. "Sounds like him." Henry chuckled, a deep, genuine sound Evan hadn't heard in years. "You've got his eyes, you know. Same way of looking straight at people, like you already see what they're hiding." Evan's breath caught. For so long, he had believed his father's days were over, that the old man's mind was lost in bitterness. But here he was, telling stories, smiling, alive again. Sarah emerged from the doorway, her long coat brushing against her boots, a clipboard tucked under her arm. She was checking on patients, but when she saw Henry laughing, she stopped, her face softening. For a brief second, she and Evan's eyes met through the fence. She gave him a quiet nod, a wordless invitation to come closer. But he didn't move. He stood in the snow, watching his father point toward the horizon, laughing with Logan and Ranger under a sky of pale winter light. His heart felt like it was breaking and healing all at once. He whispered to himself, voice trembling in the cold. "Maybe I was wrong. He never needed a shelter. He just needed someone to listen." Evan turned away, wiping the moisture from his eyes before it could freeze. The sound of his father's laughter followed him down the road, mingling with the soft rustle of wind through the bare trees, a sound both heartbreaking and whole. Night fell hard and fast over Portsville, cloaking the frozen town in silence. The shelter's old heating system hummed unevenly, straining against the bitter cold. Inside, the veterans had settled for the night, some sleeping, others murmuring faint memories into the dark. The air smelled faintly of wool, medicine, and old wood. Sarah Hill, her tall frame wrapped in a brown cardigan, made her final rounds with a flashlight in hand. Her auburn hair had come loose from its tie, brushing lightly against her freckled cheeks as she leaned over to check each bed. "Good night, Mr. Dawson," she said softly. Henry smiled weakly from his cot. "Good night, dear. Don't work too hard." She laughed, tired, but warm. In the small common room, Logan Hale sat polishing Ranger's collar, the German shepherd lying stretched at his feet, eyes half closed but alert. The dog's thick black and tan coat shimmered under the yellow light. Logan's face was half shadowed, jaw tense, as though he sensed something unsettled in the stillness. Outside, wind pressed against the windows, rattling them like fingers knocking from another world. It was near midnight when it happened. A sharp metallic snap echoed from the basement, followed by a low hiss, then a sudden whoosh. Within seconds, orange light flared through the cracks beneath the doors. The heater had burst. The first explosion ripped through the ductwork, shattering glass and sending a wave of smoke billowing down the corridor. Sarah stumbled as the building shuddered. "Fire!" she screamed, her voice breaking through the hall. "Everyone out! Now!" Logan sprang to his feet before she finished the sentence. "Ranger, with me!" The dog barked sharply, a sound that cut through panic like a blade. He sprinted ahead, nose low, guiding toward the smoke. Henry was already coughing violently in his room, struggling to reach his wheelchair. Logan burst in through the haze, eyes squinting against the smoke. "I've got you, sir." He hoisted the frail man into his arms, his Navy SEAL training kicking in without thought. Ranger ran ahead, barking directions as if mapping the exit through the flames. Meanwhile, Sarah ran toward the kitchen, grabbing the emergency phone, but the line was dead. Flames licked along the ceiling, swallowing curtains, crawling up the old beams. She darted toward the exit, but a burst of heat sent her backward. The fire had trapped her. She covered her mouth, coughing violently as the smoke thickened. Outside, alarms wailed across the street. The first few veterans stumbled into the snow, shivering in thin clothes. Logan emerged from the entrance with Henry in his arms, face blackened with soot, his breath short but steady. He placed the old man gently in the snow. Ranger stayed close, tail low, eyes scanning. "Sarah's still inside," Henry croaked between coughs, trying to rise from the wheelchair. Logan turned, ready to go back in, but a voice called out behind. Him, Evan. The younger man's truck screeched to a halt near the fence, tires spinning on ice. He jumped out, face pale with terror. "Where's my father?" "Here," Logan said, pointing to Henry. "He's safe, but the woman, she's trapped in the kitchen." Before Logan could move, Evan dashed past him. "I'm going." Logan grabbed his arm. "It's too dangerous." "She helped my dad. I'm not letting her die." Without another word, Evan wrapped his scarf around his mouth and plunged into the doorway. The heat slammed into him like a wall, but he pushed forward, following the faint sound of coughing. He found Sarah crouched behind a counter, eyes watering, trying to shield her face from the smoke. Her tall frame trembled as she struggled to stand. "I can't see," she gasped. "Hold on," Evan said, his voice raw. He pulled off his jacket and threw it over her shoulders, then guided her toward the faint orange light that marked the exit. Every breath burned, every step felt heavier, but he kept going. Outside, the shelter's roof groaned. Flames were spreading fast. Henry, sitting near the curb, clutched his chest as he watched the inferno. Logan crouched beside him, holding a wet cloth over his mouth. "Don't you dare go back," Henry wheezed. Logan hesitated, eyes fixed on the building. Henry reached into his pocket and pulled out something glinting, a silver star medal. The same one Evan had taken earlier now returned to its rightful owner. Henry's hand trembled as he pressed it into Logan's palm. Your father dragged me out of hell once. Now it's your turn to save someone else. Logan's breath caught. He looked down at the medal, the edges warm from Henry's grip. Then he rose and ran. Ranger followed at his heels, leaping through the flames with a bark that split the night. Inside, the smoke was a living thing, thick, choking, almost solid. Logan crouched low, eyes darting through the haze. Ranger barked twice, sharply, leading him toward the kitchen. There, Evan and Sarah, silhouettes against the fire. Evan was trying to hold up a collapsing beam. Go! He shouted to Sarah. Move! Logan barked, charging forward. He grabbed the beam with both hands, muscles straining. Ranger, lead her out! The dog took Sarah's sleeve gently in his teeth and pulled, guiding her through the smoke toward the door. Flames licked Logan's arms, but he heaved with all his strength until the beam rolled aside. Evan coughed violently, eyes red, barely conscious. Logan hauled him up by the collar, dragging him through the blaze. The air outside hit them like ice, cutting through the heat. They stumbled into the snow, collapsing beside Sarah and Henry. Ranger emerged last, his fur singed, a deep cut across his flank, but his eyes still alert. He limped to Logan's side, pressing his head against his master's chest. Logan's hand found the dog's neck, squeezing gently. Good boy, he whispered hoarsely. Moments later, sirens wailed and red lights filled the night. Firefighters rushed past, hoses roaring to life. Sarah leaned against Evan, her face streaked with soot and tears. Henry was weeping silently, clutching the medal still warm from the flames. Ranger whimpered softly as a medic approached to tend to him. Logan looked over to where Evan knelt beside his father, holding his hand tight. The old man reached up and brushed the ash from his son's cheek, voice trembling but full of love. You came back, he said. Evan nodded, tears cutting clean lines through the soot. I should never have left. In that moment, amid the ruin and smoke, something shifted. Logan met Evan's eyes, and though neither spoke, a silent understanding passed between them. A bond forged not by war or blood, but by redemption. The snow kept falling, soft and pure, covering the blackened ground like forgiveness. Dawn broke over Portsville in a haze of silver and gray. The fire trucks had gone, leaving behind the hollow silence that follows catastrophe. Smoke still rose in thin, twisting ribbons from what remained of St. Bernard's shelter, now little more than a blackened skeleton against the winter sky. The snow that had fallen overnight was streaked with soot, melting into puddles that reflected the broken rafters and burned walls. The air smelled of wet ash and iron. Logan Hale stood at the edge of the ruin, his navy blue coat torn and streaked with smoke, his face marked by exhaustion and resolve. His hair, dark and slightly unkempt, clung to his forehead where the heat had singed it. Beneath his calm exterior, his eyes carried the heavy stillness of a man who had seen destruction too many times and still chose to rebuild. At his feet, Ranger, the German shepherd, limped slightly, his right foreleg wrapped in a clean white bandage. The dog's fur, normally sleek and glossy, was dulled by soot, yet his golden brown eyes still gleamed with life. When Logan rested a hand on his head, Ranger wagged his tail weakly, pressing close as if to reassure him that he would be fine. Around them, volunteers and fire inspectors picked through debris. Among the helpers was Sarah Hill, her auburn hair tucked messily into a beanie, cheeks flushed red from the cold. Her tall frame moved gracefully despite fatigue, and her green eyes burned with a kind of stubborn purpose. She wore a heavy brown parka now instead of her cardigan, boots crunching against the frozen ground as she helped the workers clear the wreckage of what had been her second home. Her voice was soft but firm, guiding the others with a quiet authority that demanded respect. Evan Dawson arrived mid-morning, his pickup truck carrying thermoses of coffee and blankets. His face, once hardened by guilt and pride, seemed softer now, as though the fire had burned away more than wood. It had melted something inside him, too. He wore a faded navy jacket and gloves, his hands trembling slightly as he approached the ruins. His father, Henry, sat nearby in his wheelchair, bundled in a wool blanket that Sarah had given him, the silver star medal glinting faintly on his chest. His eyes were tired but clear, the same steel-blue eyes that once faced a battlefield without flinching. Logan looked up when Evan approached. The two men exchanged a nod, simple, quiet, but full of understanding. There was no need for words. Henry broke the silence with a raspy chuckle. Didn't think I'd see this place again in daylight. Sarah crouched beside him, brushing ashes from the wheels of his chair. You will, she said. We'll rebuild. Maybe smaller, maybe better. Logan turned toward her. We? Sarah met his gaze, her eyes steady. I'm not letting this end here, Logan. These men still need a home. They've lost enough already. She looked at Ranger, who was lying beside Henry's chair. And maybe we build something new, something that gives back. Evan frowned thoughtfully. What do you mean? She took a deep breath, wiping her soot-streaked hands on her jeans. A program for veterans and therapy dogs, to help men like your father and others who come back from war carrying more than scars. We could call it the Ranger Fund, after the dog who saved us all. The words hung in the cold air like a spark refusing to die. Logan looked down at Ranger, who was licking his paw carefully. He'd like that, he said quietly. Evan stared at the ruins, his breath misting in the frigid air. I used to think my father was just a bitter old man holding on to the past. But now, his voice faltered. Now I see he's the bravest man I've ever known. He turned to Henry, eyes shining. You saved people long before that fire, didn't you? Henry smiled faintly. I just did my duty. Like your friend here. He gestured to Logan, and like that dog of his. Sarah placed a hand on Henry's shoulder, her touch gentle but strong. Duty's one thing, compassion's another. The world needs both. As the morning wore on, they worked together. Logan helped the firefighters dismantle the last unstable beams, his movements precise and deliberate. Evan shoveled debris, coughing through clouds of ash, while Sarah organized the supplies and distributed hot coffee. Henry, though confined to his chair, kept watch over them with quiet pride, his voice occasionally breaking the stillness with a story of the war, of his late wife, of how small acts of courage often saved more lives than medals ever could. A journalist arrived from the local newspaper, a young woman named Kelly Reeves, bundled in a navy coat with a press badge pinned crookedly to her lapel. She had a sharp, freckled face, framed by curly blonde hair, and a notebook clutched tightly in one gloved hand. I'm here about the fire, she said briskly, scanning the group. People in town are talking about a Navy SEAL and his dog who saved a dozen veterans last night. Is that you? Logan shifted uncomfortably. We just did what anyone would do. Kelly smiled wryly. Not everyone runs into burning buildings. She took a few photos. Logan standing beside Ranger, Sarah clearing debris, Henry watching from his chair, and asked for a quote. Sarah gave one, her tone firm and proud. Heroes come in all shapes. Some wear uniforms, some walk on four legs. By afternoon, the sun had climbed higher, warming the ash enough to release faint curls of steam. Evan finished stacking the last of the debris, his shoulders sagging from fatigue. He walked to where his father sat, crouched beside the wheelchair, and took his hand. "I used to think I was doing the right thing leaving you here, Dad," he said softly. "Now I know. You didn't need a shelter. You just needed someone to stay." Henry's fingers tightened around his son's hand. His voice trembled, but his eyes shone with peace. "You came back. That's what matters. Sometimes God burns things down so we can see what's worth saving." Ranger lifted his head at the sound of Henry's voice, tail thumping lightly. The old man chuckled and reached down to pat his head. "He saved me again," Henry murmured, smiling. "And this time, he saved my boy too." Snow began to fall once more, soft and steady, covering the blackened ruins like a promise. In the distance, the faint sound of church bells carried through the air, solemn yet hopeful. Logan looked around at the small group. Evan and Henry, Sarah brushing snow from her coat, Ranger limping but proud, and felt something warm stir in his chest. It wasn't the heat of battle or adrenaline this time. It was peace. That night, the Portsville Gazette ran the headline, "Navy SEAL and his dog save veterans from fire. Hope rises from the ashes." But in the hearts of those who lived it, the story was simpler. It was about a father found, a son redeemed, a woman who refused to give up, and a dog who reminded them all what loyalty meant. The snow had begun to melt by the time the first beams went up. The air smelled of damp wood and smoke, and the morning sun, pale but steady, spilled across the clearing where St. Bernard's shelter once stood. What remained of the burned foundation now served as the base for something new. A small wooden structure that would be the shelter's temporary home. Sawdust mixed with snow, and every hammer strike echoed like a heartbeat of renewal. Evan Dawson stood at the edge of the worksite, sleeves rolled up, his breath forming small clouds in the cold air. His once pristine jacket was now smeared with dust and paint. His calloused hands blistered from hours of labor. The bitterness that once shadowed his features had softened. His blue eyes, though still weary, carried a light that hadn't been there in years. He lifted a wooden beam with the help of Logan Hale, the Navy SEAL, whose quiet presence had become the anchor for everyone rebuilding. Logan's strong, square jaw was darkened by several days' stubble, and the scars along his forearm caught the sunlight like threads of silver. His movements were calm, precise, every action deliberate, born from discipline and purpose. Nearby, Sarah Hill directed a group of volunteers, 2 local carpenters, a teenage boy named Tommy Green with freckles and eager hands, and an elderly veteran named Walter Briggs, who stooped back didn't stop him from carrying buckets of nails. Sarah wore a wool beanie over her loose auburn hair, her cheeks flushed from the cold. There was a steadiness in her movements that made people follow her without question. Every few minutes, she would glance toward Henry, who sat bundled in his wheelchair near the edge of the work zone, watching with the quiet pride of a father who'd lived to see hope rebuilt. Ranger, his leg still bandaged but healing well, trotted around the site, occasionally stopping to bark at the crows that perched on the nearby telephone wires. His fur had regained its luster, the black and tan coat gleaming beneath the sunlight. Every so often, he would pause beside Henry's chair, resting his head against the old man's knee as if to check that he was still all right. Henry would chuckle, rubbing the dog's ears. "You're a soldier too, aren't you, boy?" By noon, the group took a break, gathering around a fire barrel. The smell of coffee mingled with pine smoke as snowflakes drifted lazily down again. Evan poured a cup for his father and handed it to him, his fingers trembling slightly. "Dad," he began, his voice low, hesitant. "I need to say something." Henry looked up, his lined face illuminated by the flicker of firelight. "Go on, son." Evan swallowed hard, eyes fixed on the steaming cup between his hands. "I spent years being angry at the world, at how hard everything was. I blamed you for things that weren't your fault. I was so scared of being poor, of ending up like those men in the shelter, that I forgot what you really were." He paused, his voice cracking. "You gave up your youth, your peace, for people you didn't even know, and I treated you like a burden instead of a hero." For a long moment, Henry didn't speak. The wind moved softly through the trees, and Ranger gave a quiet whine, as if sensing the weight of the silence. Then Henry reached out with his trembling hand and rested it over his son's. "Evan," he said softly, "you were never wrong for being afraid. Fear's what keeps us alive, but it's also what keeps us small. I spent years thinking honor meant medals and parades, but it's simpler than that. Honor is how you treat others when no one's watching." Evan's eyes filled, and he nodded slowly. "I understand now, Dad." Sarah, who had been quietly listening nearby, turned away to hide the emotion in her eyes. She picked up her clipboard and said briskly, "All right, break's over. We've got a roof to finish before sundown." Her tone was practical, but her smile was soft. The afternoon stretched into golden light. Snow melted into slush as the hammering resumed. Evan climbed the ladder to fasten the final plank, Logan steadying it below. Henry watched, his breath visible in the air, while Ranger lay curled beside his chair. The rhythmic sounds of labor, wood creaking, metal striking metal, filled the space where sorrow once lingered. As the last nail was driven in, Logan's phone buzzed in his coat pocket. He stepped aside, frowning slightly, and answered, "Hale here." A pause, then a voice on the other end, an archivist from Washington. Logan's brow furrowed as he listened. "You're sure?" Another pause. Yes, thank you." He hung up, staring into the distance for a moment before turning back toward Henry. "What is it?" Sarah asked, wiping her hands on her jeans. Logan exhaled slowly. "They found it. A piece of my father's journal. It was preserved in a military archive in Maryland. The curator verified the details. Names, dates. It says here that Henry Dawson saved his life during the Da Nang fire support incident, 1969. Evan froze, glancing at his father. Henry's mouth opened slightly, eyes wide with disbelief. "Your father. He remembered?" "He did," Logan said quietly. "And he wrote about it. He said he owed his survival to you. Said you dragged him out while shells were falling." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the small silver star medal, its surface polished clean since the fire. "I think this belongs to you, sir." Henry shook his head, his voice trembling. "No, it doesn't. That medal's been through enough hands already." Logan smiled faintly. "Then let it go through one more." He knelt and pinned it gently back onto Henry's jacket, over the heart that had carried its memory for half a century. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. The sound of the hammering stopped. The volunteers turned to watch. Even the wind held still. Evan began to clap slowly, his hands shaking. Sarah joined in, then Walter, then Tommy. Soon the clearing was filled with the sound of applause. Ranger barked twice, sharp and bright, his tail thumping against the frozen ground. Henry's eyes glistened as he looked from his son to Logan, then to the small crowd gathered around. 50 years ago, he said hoarsely, your father pulled me out of fire. Today, you pulled my son out of his own. He smiled, tears tracing the wrinkles of his face. Guess the world really does come full circle. The sun dipped low, setting the sky aflame with orange and rose. The new roof gleamed under its glow, a promise rising from ashes. And for the first time in years, everyone there felt something more powerful than survival. Peace, forgiveness, and the quiet joy of belonging. Ranger lifted his head toward the sunset, ears pricked as if hearing something only he could understand. Then he barked once more, a sound clear and strong, like the echo of the past being finally set free. A full year had passed since the fire that nearly took St. Bernard's shelter from the world. The seasons had come and gone, washing away the ash and replacing it with green, then gold, and finally white once more. On this winter morning, the town of Portsville stirred beneath a quiet snowfall. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the faint scent of pine and fresh paint. At the end of the main street, where charred ruins once stood, now rose a new building of warm brick and glass. Above its entrance, bold bronze letters gleamed beneath the gray sky. Dawson Hall, for those who fought and were forgotten. The ceremony drew a small crowd. Veterans in worn coats, families with flags in their hands, townspeople bundled in scarves. Inside the crowd, Logan Hale stood tall and composed, his posture straight as if still on duty. He wore a dark wool coat over his U.S. Navy uniform, the medals on his chest polished to mirror brightness. Beside him, Ranger, the German shepherd, sat proudly, the fur on his healed leg slightly lighter where the burn scar had grown. His eyes gleamed amber beneath the cold morning light, and his breath formed steady clouds in the air. Evan Dawson adjusted the microphone at the wooden podium. He looked different now, clean-cut, dressed in a simple gray suit that fit him well. A small pin shaped like a folded flag gleamed on his lapel. His voice trembled slightly as he spoke to the crowd. A year ago, this place was nothing but ashes and memory. Today, it stands as proof that no one who served, no one who sacrificed, should ever be forgotten. He paused, glancing toward his father, Henry Dawson, who sat in his wheelchair near the front, wrapped in a navy blanket, his silver star pinned neatly on his chest. The lines on Henry's face had deepened, but his eyes were clear and bright, filled with peace. At Evan's side stood Sarah Hill, still tall and graceful, her auburn hair tied neatly beneath a wool beret. Her long beige coat fluttered in the winter wind, and the kindness in her green eyes made her look almost timeless. Over the past year, she had become the steady heart of Dawson Hall, organizing outreach programs, helping veterans find therapy dogs, managing the new Ranger Fund that now supported shelters across the state. There was a calm confidence in the way she carried herself, as though she had finally found her purpose in the rhythm of helping others heal. After Evan's speech, a small brass band played softly, trumpets, a snare drum, and the low hum of a tuba. The crowd stood in silence as the American flag was raised slowly up the new pole, the fabric snapping gently in the wind. Then came the moment everyone waited for. Evan wheeled his father forward toward the ribbon stretched across the entrance. Henry's frail hands shook slightly as Sarah handed him a pair of golden scissors. Logan and Ranger stood just behind them, solemn and proud. Henry looked at the faces gathered before him. Young soldiers, old comrades, strangers who had come to witness something sacred. His voice, when he spoke, was soft but steady. "I don't deserve my name on this hall," he said, eyes glistening. "There were men who didn't make it home. But if this place can give hope to those who did, then maybe we've all come home together." He cut the ribbon, and the crowd erupted into applause. Ranger barked once, sharp and clear, as if saluting. Evan knelt beside his father, resting a hand on his shoulder. For the first time, Henry didn't look weary. He looked fulfilled. Inside, the building smelled of fresh paint and cedar wood. The main hall displayed framed photographs of veterans, some smiling, some stoic, each with a story beneath their portrait. A small plaque near the entrance read, "Dedicated to all who fought battles seen and unseen." In the corner stood a polished oak bench engraved with the words, "The Ranger Fund, Loyalty Never Fails." Later, as the guests began to leave, the first snow of the season began to fall, soft flakes drifting down through the gray afternoon. Henry insisted on sitting outside under the porch, watching the world turn white again. Ranger lay curled at his feet, his head resting gently on the old man's knee. Evan stepped out a moment later, wearing a heavy golden coat that shimmered faintly under the pale sky. He walked quietly to his father's side, slipping his hands into his pockets. For a long moment, they didn't speak. Only the sound of snow falling filled the silence. Then Evan said softly, "I used to think home was a place I had to find, Dad. But now I see. It's a place you build, piece by piece." Henry turned to look at him, a slow smile spreading across his weathered face. "You finally understand," he murmured. Evan nodded, voice breaking slightly. "I'm not taking you anywhere anymore. You're already home." Henry reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and placed it on his son's arm. "So are you." From behind them, Sarah appeared in the doorway, holding 2 steaming mugs of coffee. Her cheeks glowed pink from the cold. "You two planning to sit out here till spring?" she teased gently. Evan smiled, taking a mug from her, just making sure he doesn't run off with the dog again. Henry chuckled. "If I could stand, I would." Ranger wagged his tail as if agreeing. Logan stepped out next, his figure framed by the warm light spilling from the doorway. "They're ready for the group photo," he said. "Thought we'd better get you before you freeze solid." They gathered together beneath the new sign. Henry in his chair at the center, Logan standing tall behind him, Sarah beside Evan, and Ranger sitting proudly in front. The photographer, a young woman with round glasses and wind-flushed cheeks, counted down. 3, 2, 1. The flash burst in a glow of white. The resulting picture captured more than faces. It captured a bond forged by struggle, sacrifice, and forgiveness. 2 generations of soldiers, 2 souls healed, 1 loyal companion, and a woman whose faith held them all together. As the snow thickened, the camera lingered on them. The 4 of them looking out toward the street now blanketed in white. The faint sound of bells rang in the distance, mingling with the hush of the storm. A voice, soft yet strong, seemed to rise with the wind. "Some roads lead us apart, but only honor and compassion can bring us home again." And as Ranger lifted his head toward the sky, barking once more into the falling snow, it felt as though the past had finally found peace, and the future, at last, had a home. Sometimes, God does not speak through thunder or miracles, but through quiet acts of love between broken people. What happened at Dawson Hall was not luck. It was grace. The kind that rebuilds what fire destroys, the kind that turns guilt into forgiveness and strangers into family. Every day, there are people around us who carry silent battles, waiting for someone to listen, to reach out, to remind them they are not forgotten. Maybe the miracle we pray for is not far away. It might begin with a single act of kindness we choose to give today. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe for more stories of faith and redemption, and may God bless you and your family with peace, compassion, and the courage to love without measure. Amen.